Call to order for a Watertown City Council work session for December 9th of 2024. Interim City Manager Bob Zine, please call the roll.
Okay. Durans. He's here.
Aye.
Okay, there we go. Peters.
Here.
Shetty.
Here.
Tupper.
Here.
Bueller. Danforth.
Here.
Helene.
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. I apologize. Let's rise while Councilman Shetty leads us in prayer. And then we'll do the pledge. Even though it's not on the agenda, we're doing things right here in Watertown.
Heavenly Father, this new day you've given us to live our lives, to live in a way to bring you glory, and today we gather to make decisions. And I thank you for those, Lord, in this room, in this community, in this city, that the skills, the abilities you've given us all to make a city work and function. And so, Lord, I just pray a blessing over all that are here today, over our first responders always, Lord, that they do to keep the city safe and healthy. And again, today, as we make decisions, we just ask for your wisdom and guidance and what's the betterment for all of us here in this community. In Jesus' name, amen.
Quorum is established. We're going to approve the agenda. I'm just going to tell council we're going to bounce around just a little bit. We're going to take the zoo up first. Then we're going to go C, A, D, B in that order on the regular agenda. So just wanted to let everyone know that. With that, the chair will entertain a motion to approve today's agenda. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Danforth. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We're on to item 5C, a discussion of the Bramble Park Zoo operational plan. We welcome our Public Works Director, Dusty Rodick. Did I say part? What did I say? Public Works. Oh, sorry, Heath. Okay.
You barely did.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Thank you. Just wanted to take this opportunity. There's been discussion in the past, particularly around budgeting and everything for the zoo. And obviously, back in September, the zoo was denied accreditation for a variety of different reasons. Some of that I kind of laid out in the background in your packet. But at the end of the day, we were very close. We've had some discussion both with Lake Area Zoo Society and the Park Board. It's like, and staff, how would we like to move forward? And we would like to pursue accreditation again, but we also want to do that in a financially responsible manner. And that is doable, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to lay out some of the recommendations that have been developed with both the Zoo Society and the Park Board and staff, how we get there. I listed an objective is within 4 years regain AZA accreditation, staying within our support levels, the capital planning that you guys will see again in a little bit, with the assistance of the Lake Area Zoological Society as our partner organization. I believe we can do that. And again, doing it in a fiscally responsible manner moving forward. Before you is a list of strategic action items. Like I said, we can answer any questions on any of these handouts, but this was primarily what I wanted to visit with you all on. Strategic action items, how are we going to achieve this? One would be through the facility improvements that have been highlighted in this and maybe past accreditation inspections, and those are listed there. Those items are also consistent with the capital plan that you guys will be approving at some point. So, those things are in there and in those years. again, balance the operations to available resources. There's ways to do that internally, just look at potentially the collection, look at energy efficiencies, transition more towards winter viewing species, look at our rehab program, is there a way to get more support? Then from there, it would be, as a part of the accreditation or the evaluation, there's some staffing things to address, and we're actually not looking at requesting any additional staff. It would be just restructuring some of the existing. We have a current open zookeeper position that we, may want to transition to that animal care supervisor role. An office specialist position that could have a multi-role in supporting the visitor services and the education, while also helping with some administrative support. We've had conversation, and we have, great working relationship with LAZS, and they're going to look at taking a more active role. Currently, city is doing a lot of their book work and things like that for the society. They're looking to take ownership of some of that stuff back and help with, event staffing, things like that. So that's going to help on the staffing side as well. Evaluate hours of operation. Again, does it, the hours that we're open, does that make sense? And then, look at some automated systems where appropriate, and I highlight a little bit more of that later. I talked a little bit about, reshaping the partnership roles and focus with the Lake Area Zoo Society. They're in the process of, doing their bylaws. We're going to look at probably a more specific MOU, so we have a good, clear understanding of, each person's role as we move forward with the zoo. So, and I mentioned, their active role in event staffing and internal record keeping. Beyond that, there's also, ways that we can look, at some self-service things. And this will be part of the staffing. Do we look at a self-service kiosk for general admission ticketing? You could, use that same thing for donations. Interactive educational displays. As technology advances, there's opportunities in the zoo world too for those sort of things. And again, with the animal care, health monitoring, feeding, watering systems, if that, makes sense to, and again, that part of that, does that make sense, is, the cost involved with those as well, so. And the other things, commission an updated economic impact study. There has not been a current one since,
Early 90s was the last one I could find from Augustana.
we have some, information on visitor numbers and, where our visitors are coming from and whatever, but we don't have a good grasp on true economic impact. And again, lastly, if we, move forward with this plan, realign the master and strategic plans to reflect those. So, I guess that's primarily what I have. We did provide you some additional information, and would stand for questions at this point.
And I'd like to thank you, Director Rodick, Parks and Recreation Director. Stacy, would you like to add anything? We have the Bramble Park Zoo Superintendent, Stacy Ploker. Did I get the last name right, or?
Bucker.
Plucker, okay, sorry.
That's fine.
Would you like to add anything?
Being newer to my role, Dusty and I have a great relationship, and we keep talking and going over things, and it's one of those, we just look at it and what makes the most sense. We look financially, staffing, all of that. So there's a lot of changes and growth, but a lot of flexibility we're trying to obtain too, with a lot of stuff.
All right, and this is more of a information for the council to understand how the Bremple Park Zoo and Park Board is going forward with this, but if you have any questions, now is the time to ask the experts. Councilman Shetty?
Thank you, Mayor. All right, so well, yeah, thank you for your work on this. I was reading it over the weekend, and obviously a lot of people have come together to work through this, and so thank you for your leadership on that. On the last part of the sheet that you were reading, that you were kind of explaining to us, it talks about reasons to regain the AZA accreditation. There's the first column, I'm assuming the first 2 points are probably the highest, first few points are the highest marks for why to do it. Is there any way you could just expound on that just for a moment on for example, participation in over 500 animal programs to aid in collection, planning, and breeding so people can come to the zoo and see baby animals, family groups. I mean, where are we at currently? Do we do much? What do we currently have in that category? Is there more that we could be had, or just kind of expound on that if you don't mind?
So currently, I believe we have 21 breeding programs that we participate in. Part of this discussion is there's another accrediting body that we could have gone with, but they have 2 breeding programs instead of the 500, which really limits what we can work with, and the availability of animals. So that's part of the reason we want to go AZA, because we have more flexibility with animals, so then we can look at more cold hardy species. Everyone comes to the zoo and wants to see babies. So participating in these programs, we can have more babies, which is going to draw people into the zoo, which helps out with funding and revenue and all the above. But it's nice because we work with zoos then all over the country. So last shipment we did was with Cincinnati Zoo. And we work with San Diego Zoo. We work with smaller zoos like Zoo New England, things like that. So we do what's best for the animals, we move them, and it's better for their population overall. But it's also nice is we're not buying and selling the animals. So all these animals coming and going and breeding, they don't cost us anything. With a lot of these other programs, we have to pay every time we bring something in new. So again, we're looking at both sides of this with costs and revenues and what's going to be best for us.
Any follow-up, Councilman? Councilman Danforth?
I do. Last time we had this conversation, they were going to reduce, I think they said the mouths, the feeding mouths, and I asked what this is way before you, Dusty, and they had promised to reduce the number of mouths, and I asked what mouths, and they said, well, mouths, and I said, well, it's a difference if you're reducing it by 400 guppies versus 400 buffalo. Point is we have a lot of mouths, and some are this big and some are really big. So as I look at this, I am a big supporter of our zoo, and my concern is for the zoo, the sustainability of the zoo. And Dusty, you and I have had this conversation a few times. So I got some just general questions. How do we quantify the value of the AZA accreditation? I mean, we can talk about getting the animals, but how do we put that into terms of dollars and cents to us?
Not easily. If I could have, I would have. But they do a lot of continuing education, which is great, which is helpful for staff. We actually have we work with a company through San Diego Zoo to help with education, and we get it at a way discounted rate because of that. And now AZA is just starting their own continuing education. We are still learning every single day about animals and how to treat them better, how to work with them better. So this helps our staff stay on the top end of all of that research. It helps us participate in that research. With the animals, we're getting them for free, which is always great. Just as an example, every year this will be different, but last year we brought in a camel. The cheapest camel I could find was $20,000. We got him for free because we were AZA. So every year, like I said, is different, but like we just did a big Simang transfer. You can't legally buy and sell them anymore. And so then we are just removed from those programs. So some of it is the appeal the zoo has. With the passage of the big cat laws, you can't buy and sell big cats anymore. So if we aren't part of these programs, we won't have big cats. We're going to have less people coming in through the door. So I don't know how to quantify all of that. Between the programs that AZA offers, their breeding program, their continuing education program, their help. So they also work with a ton of researchers. As an example, we had an issue with our Calibus earlier this year. I called up the Calibus experts, and we're working together to fix this. We can't know everything on everyone, but I know who to call, who might know how to fix it. And so it just opens up a lot of those doors.
I know, Dusty, you had mentioned trying to understand our attendance numbers, where they coming from, that type of thing. Do we have historical attendance records in regard by month? So we, obviously, we see that the summer months, the
We do by
mid-season ones.
month. Like I said, and Kim could probably tell you what the attendance was for any month in the last 10 years, but
Well, and I'm not looking for that now, but is that something that could get compiled and emailed to the council? I think it's just helpful to kind of understand this as we go forward.
sure, I mean, just for example, and again, every year is different, but I was just looking at these numbers the other day, and at least for 2024, this will be our highest number of attendance in the last 6 years. 21 was the highest with, the COVID bounce back. But, our attendance is up probably over, 10% of what it was last year. So, we're trending in, at least this year, a good direction, so.
Well, if we could get that information so we could look, I do know at one point, it's been a number of years ago, that they, when we talked about attendance, one of the things that was communicated to us at that point was the company that they had worked with in part on our zoo pretty much put us at a market cap at about 60,000, if I remember right. Don't know where that's at today, have no idea, but that's kind of what that number that I recall from those years.
I would say that's probably relatively close.
Give or take a little.
Yeah, I mean, for example, I'm gonna anticipate we're gonna end the season right around 61 to 62,000.
Yep, so it's real close.
Yep.
If I look back at 2024, and I'm going to have to ask Kristen over here for some help on 25, but we subsidized, for lack of better terms, the operational side of the zoo about $1.1 million. I don't know what that number looks like for this year.
It's, I actually, and it's not like I read your mind, but
Probably did.
for example, I'll just run off some numbers in the last couple of years. 2020, it was 720,000. 21 was 535. 22, 792. Last year was 960. This year it was budgeted at roughly 1,137,000, but based on decent revenues, better than expected revenues and lower expenses, it's likely to come in right around that 900,000 mark
Okay, for 2024.
for 2024.
Year end. So
Yep.
what are we planning for 2025?
I think we budgeted, right around $1 million.
Okay. My concern with that is how do we sustain that? And if I go back in time in my not very good memory, Sioux Falls ran into this same challenge that we're having, and they got a great zoo down there. But they ran into the same thing, where their city council got to a point where they said, enough. And that was in about the mid-'80s. So what they did at that time is they turned the operations of the zoo over to their Sioux Falls Zoological Society, whatever that's called down there. And that's how they're running it now. And one of their theories was, we're going to draw a line on how much the city can pay towards this thing. But the second thing is they really felt that the ability to raise funds was much greater with the Zoological Society behind it versus the city behind it. Private sector, nonprofit versus the city. And it must be working for them, because they've really made some great improvements down there, and I was down there this last summer, and it's very nice. It does a good job. Don't know their problems down there, but have we ever considered anything like that?
Let's say we have kicked it around. Again, with with the recommendations that I had described, and I can go into more detail, personally or as a group if you want. But one of the things that we talked about in our conversations with the Zoological Society is, them becoming a more effective fundraising arm. In the past, and it's worked, things change, but in the past, there was kind of a melding of funds. They'd pay for improvements, certainly, or help pay for improvements, but they also, were throwing in some money for the operations side of things. As we move forward, we're hoping to have, more clear fundraising goals from the Zoo Society. And again, the city, looking at the operations side, the way Sioux Falls does it, they, as I understand it, they write a check, the city writes a check to, their support organization down there. Excuse me.
I believe that's correct.
But, at this point, we feel like, at least for Watertown, if we can, the goal is to at least maintain this level of subsidy, that we're at now. And again, by some of these things, you said reduce the amount of mouths to feed. That's one of the things we're looking at with, the collection. And again, I understand if you're downsizing one horse versus 15 goldfish, well, that's different. But again, there's some things that Stacy and I have talked about that will have a real impact without the public necessarily, when they come visit the zoo, without having a
Negative
a
impact.
negative impact on our visitation. So that will push towards that more sustainable, we put together a sustainability committee, met 2 or 3 times. Some of the things that we've incorporated into these recommendations came through that. And then, we were gonna continue to meet, then this whole situation came up. So it's like, all right, we will get back to that, but, we did at least start that, and some of those recommendations from that couple of meetings are incorporated into this plan as we move forward, so.
Because additionally, and correct me if I'm wrong, we also, we help support the zoo from a capital side, the building side. So that's not reflected in the $1 million, give or take a little from that.
Correct.
And as we'll be discussing later today, hopefully anyway, we're going to be talking about the challenges that we have with our capital dollars and how we prioritize where we want to put those dollars. And so the zoo has to come into play with that and understanding how that fits in. So it's long been a concern of mine, only from the standpoint of sustainability. And I very much welcome Dusty and crew, the attention of bringing focus to sustainability. The last thing we want to do is find out that we either can't have a zoo, or it's not what we want it to be, or because those dollars are needed elsewhere. I mean, there's all these little hands in there, right? Mm-hmm. So, so I appreciate the efforts that y'all are going through here, and hopefully we see something. And if you need to get rid of some guppies, I'll take them.
Yeah,
Anyway, that's all I have, Mayor.
And honestly, when we put this together, it says right there, staying within current city support levels. That was intentional. That's not to say it's not going to vary, $50,000 here or there, but, essentially in the range that we're in, let's regain this accreditation, and be fiscally smart about it. I understand the level of subsidy is high, but it is a good community resource as well, so.
Last question, I think. Dusty, as I've read through your report today, I mean, there's a lot in there. are there estimates on what those costs are? You know, if we looked 5 years, 4 or 5 years from now, I think you said we'd want to be back to accreditation, correct? So other than what would be the plan, just general operating, what kind of dollars are we talking about on a total basis or an annual basis to get us to that point beyond just general operations? I mean, because
It's-
there's some of it's structure, which is
Right.
going to fall under the capital. side.
And the capital is included in, you know, in the current capital plan.
Each individual item is
Yep,
required.
we're not asking anything additional in with these recommendations than what you will see in the capital plan. So like I said, we're trying to be very strategic about this, you know, keeping in mind, you know, I've been around city, you know, governments and municipal governments for a long time, and I understand the challenges, so I try and operate within that framework to have that first and foremost, you know. These are not my dollars, these are the public's dollars, so, and
there's
I
never
I
enough.
treat them as such.
Well, Dusty, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your help, and it was good information to read today. Thank you.
Councilman Tupper.
I just got a question for Councilman Danforth. With less mouths to feed, how many of those buffalo do you want out to your place?
Take the buffalo. I heard they're good eating.
How about otters?
All right. I actually do have a couple different questions. So number one is, considering that the AZA, the entity that is across the border to the north, was the one that, you know, that's where they met at least, was the one that denied the accreditation. Are they open to working with you? Do you have a conversation ongoing with them to address the needs that they have cited in the report?
Yes, actually, and that's one of the things in the handouts is the AZA Pathways Program. So when we signed up for that, it's about half of what our dues would have been. So it's still saving us money in the long run. Then we get a mentor who will come out as often as we need them to. They'll look over our stuff. It's another set of eyes to help us out. We haven't joined that yet, but that is our the recommendation from the Park and Rec Board. In the meantime, I've been working with several other people around our area. We had Fargo come down. We have Cleveland coming out later this week. They look at everything. They give me feedback. Where do they see we're lacking? Where can we improve here, here, and here? So it's not a one-sided or a one person's opinion. And that's some of what's hard, because our inspectors came out and we had 4 different inspectors out and they said, we can work with this. We got there and they said no. So it is an opinion thing, so that's why I want multiple eyes on it, multiple opinions in the process, so then we make sure.
And I think that you kind of touched upon it, but I just want to, for the public, because this meeting denied it, does not mean that the Bramble Park Zoo, we were not like kicked out. We were basically put in, like, we need you to show that you're working on these things. So for the public to understand, we're still, you know, recognized as a world quality zoo, and we're just trying to meet the ever-changing, increasing standards.
Correct.
Yes.
We're still working with all the same breeding programs. We have some more paperwork to fill out for them. Like I said, they're coming out, they have to look at us, making sure everything is up to the standards that they want everything taken care of at. But overall, we're still operating like normal.
And I want to thank you for that, because for the public, I want to make it clear, I know that we mentioned this before, but the group that actually came out to the Bramble Park Zoo to take a look at it and interview everyone and look at the facilities, they said it was a great zoo. They recommended accreditation. I want to make that perfectly clear. So the people who know the best are the ones who actually said, let's certify Bramble Park Zoo. It was just when it got up to the highest level at a meeting of people who have never been to Bramble Park Zoo, or probably not ever, and a couple of the concerns that were identified as by the group that came locally as not being a big deal were considered a bigger deal on that level. Nothing that could not be worked through, and that's what you have been showing here, is that you're willing to work through it. So I want to make that perfectly clear to the public that Bramble Park Zoo did everything right. And by the crew that actually saw it, they thought it was a very workable zoo, and any of the problems that they had is not anything different than any other zoo in the entire world is going to be facing, because there's always going to be things that they're going to identify as that they want to see being done better. So I want to make that perfectly clear, and I want to thank you for the work that you have been doing, the work that you're doing here. And then also, I also do understand, as I think we all do, that, you know, dollars are tight when it comes to public money. But at the same time, there are things that just pure dollars can't buy, and that is partly an identity of the city of Watertown. We have been a city with a zoo for over 100 years. I don't think anyone wants to change that. So we want to continue to have the best zoo possible. So I want to thank you for this plan going forward. I think it is a good one to work through the, let's say, the zoo bureaucracy. But there are rules in the zoo that, you know, need to be addressed. And I thank you for dealing with those, and I thank you for what you do on behalf of the community of Watertown.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll go to item 5A, an authorization for the City of Watertown to apply for an economic development grant on behalf of the Watertown Development Company in the amount of $2.5 million, and authorization for the Assistant Finance Officer to be the authorized representative to sign related grant documents, including application and acceptance of funds on behalf of the city. Interim City Manager Bob Zine.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Yes, in front of the council is, essentially what this is asking for is the Watertown Development Company they're actually in the process right now of receiving funding through an EDA grant. The city does need to be part of that process to facilitate it. Essentially, we will be the ones applying for it. The $1 million match is the responsibility of WDC. We've done this during a past grant as well. So it's not anything different. So the grant will be under the WDC, but we need to help facilitate it. We'll also help facilitate the process of sending out the request for the grant reimbursements as well. So if there's any further questions, I can help. Thanks.
Before we talk about this, Chair would like to entertain a motion to authorize the application and the signing. Motion made by Councilman Peters, motion made by Councilman Bueller, seconded by Councilman Peters. So open it up for questions and comments, Council. Councilman Tupper?
Interim City Manager, this is more for the Calvin Industrial Park, is that what I understand?
That is correct. Yep. So it's a $3.5 million project. It's a $2.5 million grant for the lift station at Calvin Industrial, and then the WGC will be the $1 million match.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to, Officer Bob Zine, you can add to it if you want, but this is, could potentially be a fantastic asset to the Calvin Industrial Park, because by having this, you really facilitate future growth. A lot of more businesses, either new businesses could come in, or businesses that are existing in Watertown can expand. And it is a wonderful grant application, so that what the city is really putting forward, what the WDC is putting forward, pales in comparison to what we're getting in return. And then the long-term ramifications for growth for the future of Watertown is really something potentially fabulous. So just wanted to mention that. Any other questions or comments on this item? All right, the motion is to authorize for the application and the signing of the documents. All those in favor will say aye, opposed nay. Officer Bob Zine, please call the roll.
Okay. Jurens?
Aye.
Peters?
Aye.
Shetty?
Aye.
Tupper?
Aye.
Bueller? Danforth?
Aye.
Helene? Motion carries.
Motion carries. We are on to item 5D, revisions of the engineering design standards. Public Works Director Von Eye.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So this is some follow-up information that will be provided here this evening related to a topic that was presented by City Engineer Peterson and Community Development Manager Hanton at the last regular meeting of the council. I apologize I wasn't able to attend that meeting, but I understand there's a handful of questions, and City Engineer Peterson has done a great job at encapsulating the information that I believe was requested. And if I could invite him to the podium, he'd walk through a handful of slides that he's compiled. The The brunt of the information we're sharing here this evening is related to the street width reduction that was proposed in the engineering design standards. We are proposing to reduce it from the required 39 feet 4 inch back of curb to back of curb width down to a 37-foot 4 inch back of curb width. So it'd be a net 2 foot reduction in street width. And rightfully so. I understand the council has some questions pertaining to that, and we've got some pretty good information again that Engineer Peterson has compiled. So I'll hand it over to him and chime in as needed, and we'll both help address any other questions as they come up.
City Engineer Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. So this first slide kind of shows the proposed change. The top is the current 39-foot 4 inches. There's a 11-foot driving lane, traffic lane, and then 8-foot parking lane. And then on each side of the street, there's an 8-foot boulevard for snow storage. What we're proposing is a 37-foot 4 inch, which it's a 10-foot driving traffic lane, still have the 8-foot parking, and then there's a 9-foot snow storage on either side of the road.
Mayor, if I could. Are you still on that same slide, Jess?
Yep.
So that bottom, the proposed, I just wanted to point out a couple factors here that I think should be taken into consideration. The right-of-way width will remain the same. We're still requiring the same 66 feet of right-of-way. So the space we have to do all the things we need to within our right-of-way, like utility installations, sidewalk installations, that space will all still be the same by holding that 66-foot right-of-way. The other point I wanted to make was that the Justin's identified on these cross sections, that 8-foot boulevard or 8-foot snow storage area between the sidewalk and the back of curb. I understand there's some question about potentially impacting snow removal. So I just wanted to point out that foot really isn't going anywhere. That snow space is still there. It's just it'll be now part of the boulevard, not part of the street. But we don't effectively lose that foot. It's still there to for snow storage. The street operations typically like to clean curb to curb. There are a few areas in town they're not able to do that for certain various reasons. But generally speaking, overwhelmingly, that's the protocol, is to clean the streets curb to curb with snow removal. But this modification, in fact, gives us another foot of boulevard snow storage. So that shouldn't adversely impact snow removal at all.
This slide is kind of summarizing some of the benefits that of the reduced width street. There's roughly 5% cost savings for the street. There's some numbers there. A typical block, 400 feet. The difference is 120,000 versus 114,000. Roughly 5%. It seems like a relatively small number, but when you have 10, 20, 40 blocks in the development, that makes a difference. Keith mentioned the snow storage already. There's an additional foot on either side. And the narrow traffic lanes actually is one of impacts traffic operations, so it slows cars down through neighborhoods. So that's an advantage driving through residential neighborhoods. And I want to point out that this change is just for the residential areas. The wider the 39-foot 4 inch, that's still in commercial areas would be the proposed.
Excuse me, Councilman Peters has a question.
Real quick, maybe for Heath. Out by the River Ridge development, what is the width of those streets, like past the Lutheran Redeemer Church? As you come off of what street is that now? And then you head west.
Off of 2nd Street into the new phases of the subdivision?
Yep.
Those would be to the 39-foot 4 inch standard, the current engineering design standard.
Okay, I was just trying to wrap my mind around it because those seem like pretty wide streets. All right.
Yeah, if I could to that question, Councilman, Mr. Mayor, that was some of the logic of these engineering design standards is they're always a living, breathing document. They should always evolve with latest technologies, latest observations in the community, different varying desires of the community as the governing board changes hands over years. or even as staff come and go and have new and different ideas. So that's why we've considered this as one of those points to look at earnestly and try to figure out ways to help right size. You know, we're in a season of right sizing within the city, our budgets and everything that we do within the city. We thought, you know, why not expand that out into everything else that we're doing, both on a regulatory perspective and on an operational perspective. And so that's where, right in line with what you're saying is this width really necessary? Are we really putting out there what we need as a community? And that's where both Justin and I and our research have decided we'd make this recommendation saying, no, we don't really think this is necessary from a traffic safety standpoint. And not only that, from an ongoing, in perpetuity, once these roads are accepted from the developers, of course, they're ours for perpetual maintenance. So if you can imagine that 2 less feet of snow plowing, 2 less feet of street width to sweep every year, 2 less feet of street that you have to replace or repair 20 years down the road, hopefully, if we get that amount out of them. That's where all this has been coming from. So I just want to add that context based on your question. Appreciate it.
Councilman Tupper?
And I don't know who to direct this, if it's Director Von Eye or City Engineer Peterson or Superintendent Bainan. Is there going to be any better efficiencies on a 37-foot road? Like when you're plowing, I mean, does that make a lot of difference or?
I think on a plowing basis, you're making the motion anyway, and as long as we can get it curb to curb, it won't be a problem.
You're probably more apt to get it curb to curb with two.
Yeah, with
two
a
less foot.
narrower street, it's easier to get it to the curb.
Yeah, because a lot of times we see they don't get curb to curb, just, you know, and I don't know if that's snow buildup or just the way the plows are set or whatever, but.
Right, and generally our lead plow is a motor grader, which has a 14-foot wide mold board, and so we cover probably 13 foot at an angle, then a truck on the edge. So our attempt is always to get it to curb, and it's with the narrow road, it'll for sure be easier.
Okay, so no real efficiency there other than, well, I suppose street.
I think if the snow is deep, probably
Yeah,
less to carry.
thank you.
So.
Councilman Shetty?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, and Mr. Bainan, if you could stay there too, because a question for you. In my neighborhood, south of the post office, compared to the north part, north of Kemp, let's say, the northern part of the community there, the roads are wider in our neighborhood. They're older neighborhoods, and so I didn't want to be the council that got us to having roads like the north part there, North Broadway, North Maple, because there's some narrow roads in there. However, by what I've been finding out, that we're not getting to those narrow types of depths, so we're talking still going to be a very manageable road. However, in that context, I just have a couple of questions, you know, based off of this slide. One was off of Councilman Tupper here, because I was already thinking about the curb to curb has been brought up, and that's theoretically. Practically, I believe it's, I mean, I've just noticed in front of my house, it's, you know, sometimes there's a foot, you know, 6 inches or something that's left, you know, throughout the whole winter. It doesn't always get to the curb. So then on that thought, if we, let's say we're down a foot or foot and a half less, how does that impact parking at this 37-foot mark if we have, let's say, in the wintertime and there's, because theoretically I don't think we're going to be licked clean right up to the curb. So if you got a, you know, foot on each side, just how does that affect parking, I guess, is that question.
You know, from my perspective, our goal is to get it to the curb. I know sometimes with new employees and stuff, it's a lot about training, but I think it's a deal where we just need to make sure we're getting it to the curb throughout the winter so it doesn't become a problem. If it does narrow up enough, if we do see that it's narrowing up a couple foot on each side, then we need to go back and remove the snow or replow it over the curb. Sometimes during the winter, it'll turn icy, hard packed, so it's more difficult. But, you know, from my perspective, we just have to make sure we get it to the curb and the boulevard.
All right, thank you. You bet.
Mayor.
And also, so as far as just doing the math here, how many lots are there from a developer's perspective now? You know, how many lots are on a city block? We were mentioning a $6,000, let's say, guesstimation savings. So how many how many lots, because that cost gets passed into the lot price, I believe, right? So I'm just curious, how many lots are there and what does that affect per lot price? Does anyone have an answer for that kind of a question?
Councilman Peters says he could answer.
Well, it really depends on the type of development. If it's townhome,
Say residential.
you know,
Yeah.
R1, R2,
Right.
you know, density really, and how many lots there is. Hopefully that passes
So-
Brandy's.
So on a typical 400-foot block, if you have a 100-foot wide R1 residential lot, you'd have 4 houses on each side of that block. Of course, sometimes lots aren't 100-foot wide, sometimes they're 75. They vary depending on the subdivision and the type of homes that the developer wants to build within that subdivision. Sometimes your R1C, of course, it can be even narrower yet. I forget the 50-foot frontage on those, so you'd have 8 on each side in that case, if my quick math serves me right. So, you know, anywhere from 4 to 8 homes on each side, so 8 to 16 total per block.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you for that, because then just doing the math, it's $500, $600, $700, $800 savings for a lot, depending on the size of the lot, if my math's correct on that. So it's not really a major savings as far as the lot price. It's more about the I suppose, just like I say, the repair of the roads, or they're just trying to make sure what math are we looking at? Where is the savings going to be for repair 20 years we mentioned down the road, or whatever that may be. But just as far as from a developer standpoint, it doesn't. You know, as far as calculating it out with the lots, I see that that gets passed on there. So, all right, I'm just kind of doing the math in my head. Thanks.
And I do want to also point out that we have some developing friends of the city in the back of the room. This wasn't necessarily the topic that they wanted to talk about, but if they had something to add, I'd be more than happy to welcome them to the microphone when they feel that the information would be valuable. But Councilman Peters, you had something?
Yeah, just real quick, where's this coming from? Is this coming from the demand or the request from the development side? Or is it more so the cost savings to the city are for surface area of a road, less repair? I mean, what really started this discussion?
I would say equal considerations were given to both those points. We haven't heard a direct request from developers to say, hey, would you reduce the street widths? But we always hear from developers about how to gain efficiencies and reduce costs in development. So indirectly, one could deduce that this would be a direct valuable impact for developers by reducing their upfront costs when they go to build these streets in our subdivisions. The second point you made, Councilman, about internal efficiencies related to our operations is definitely part of this too. Again, with everything we're going through, looking at the long-range capital plan that was referenced earlier, some of the, I don't want to call them dire straits, but some of the financial constraints we're dealing with on that long-range capital plan, every little bit like this is going to go a long way with helping us succeed with those capital projects.
Mr. Riefenberger?
Yeah, Bill Riefenberger, hometown. This might seem like a little bit, but every little bit helps, quite honestly, because otherwise it's always going the other direction, and this maybe offsets a little bit of the costs that have come up in the last few years with increased depth of gravel and increased depth of the blacktop, which is, again, on the maintenance side of things, I'm sure why that's being mandated, is to improve on those maintenance costs. So I'm all in favor of this. We've talked internally about options on that, and one of them would be narrower streets, and most of the time the conversation gets down, well, then you'd maybe have to limit parking to one side or the other. So you got to justify those, but I'm all in favor of this concept.
Councilman Danforth?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple things. Would this apply to, if we had a major area that we were going to do total rebuild, would we, let's say it's a bigger standard, or a bigger width than this, would this then apply, let's say in an older part of town or a previously developed part of town? Would this then be applied then?
Yeah, I think that to answer that question, I would say that would depend. If the city wanted to right-size a street, I know there are several that are excessively wide, like Councilman Shetty cited. If we were going to come in and do a full rebuild, engineering, I think, would recommend to right-size them for all these reasons that we're
So
discussing.
it could be used in
could
those
be.
applications.
But if we felt that we didn't want to do that, we certainly have that authority because it is our right-of-way and our roadway to build it back how it is too, if we felt that way.
Okay. And I'm not sure of the proper terminology here, but I'll be descriptive. There are certain development areas that have like a road in, and there's probably one other one in a different location, right? So we always have two. And an example, I think that would be correct, would be like Dakota Commons. Kind of got one road in, and then you go to the north, way up on Third, and you got a road out, and then all the intersecting roads internally. Those primary roads in that they lead you, your primary ingress egress roads, would they still be to this same standard, or would they be to a wider standard since their traffic load would obviously be higher?
The way our road functional classifications are broken out right now is we have a local street, and we have a collector, and we have an arterial. So what you're referring to, Councilman Danforth, I would call, it's like a hybrid between a local and a collector. It's one of your main in and out to a neighborhood, but it's not necessarily tipping the scales to be a collector. We haven't incorporated that hybrid tier of road width requirement in our engineering design standards. So long answer short is yes, it could fall back into this narrower section, and that would suffice for those roadways, unless based on the designs and the layout of the streets and where they fall in our overall street grid, unless they were to trigger being a collector street, then they would be required to be the 39-foot 4-inch still, like they are today.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Tupper?
I know earlier when we visited this last week, there was a lot of concern about safety, making the road a little bit narrower. I'm a firm believer that it's actually going to be a little safer road because it has a calming effect. I know there was a lot of concern a number of years ago when we switched Kemp Avenue and First Avenue back to two-way streets that it would be very, very dangerous because it's just a natural calming. I mean, when I drive up North Broadway or North Maple, I don't drive 25 miles an hour. That's suicidal almost, but I think it would have that calming effect that it would take care of itself. So,
All right, any further questions before we move on? All right, back to you.
I think I might skip a couple slides and kind of piggyback off of what Councilor Tupper just said. There's a couple existing streets that we took pictures of to kind of try to get an idea of what parking on both sides would look like. So this is smaller than what we're proposing. This is 35-foot 4 inches. It's Kemp Place on the east side of town. These are 9-foot drive lanes. And if you had parking on both sides, it gets to be pretty narrow there. This is 37-foot 4 inches. This is what we're proposing. This is actually up in Valley View. There's 8-foot parking, 10-foot driving lanes. It seems to be, cars can easily pass between the parking. And then this is out in Cherry Drive is one of the developments that has the 39-foot 4-inch street width, 11-foot driving lanes. Still a lot of space there. So,
Councilman Danforth, did you have something?
Yeah. Mr. Peterson, I got a question. And is it the intent on our residential streets that, let's just talk about the 39-4 today, okay, as it is. So we allow for parking on each side, and we have the driving lane in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. We're not intending for vehicles that are driving the road to be able to pass. Let's say there's a car parked. We're not intending for them to be able, those two vehicles to pass side by side between those vehicles, do we? Is that something we expect on that 39-4?
There's a possibility that could happen on residential areas. in residential areas, it probably doesn't happen too often that there's cars parked on both sides and cars are passing at the same time, but it is possible.
Yeah, it does happen, and, you know, I see it, you know, I live on the end of Grandview, so I see it on Grandview, and I don't see, because there's a lot of cars parked on that road oftentimes, I don't see cars intending to both go through. They kind of, one pulls over, the first one goes through, and the other one comes around. So I think that's the norm for the most part. If you've got a double parking or something of close proximity of vehicles. So I don't see where that changes by this reduction. I think that it's probably more of a directive that you can't go than it is maybe today where it might be a little questionable. But it feels today like in most cases, we don't get that double passing of vehicles in there, where you have an array of parked vehicles. So I don't see this changing that much, so.
And actually, on the couple of slides that Justin skipped, we could go back to briefly. It talks about those minimum lane widths, Councilman Danforth, that you referenced. So if, in a worst-case scenario, as far as the traffic demand, you've got a car parked on each side and you got a car head-to-head trying to get between those two parked cars, AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, is one of the regulatory agencies that we go to look for guidance on things like that. And they actually recommend I'll let you cover that, Justin, as far as the 10-foot versus the 9-foot traffic lanes, and then also the parking lane width could also be more minimal than what we're requiring right now, too.
Yeah, AASHTO recommends either 10-foot or 11-foot traffic lanes. We're proposing a 10-foot, but it can be as narrow as 9-foot in some cases. And AASHTO also recommends a minimum of 7-foot, and our proposal still has an 8-foot minimum parking lane. So there's some math there, like equations there. So if you do 2 10-foot, 2 7-foot, you'd have a 35-foot 4-inch, potentially would be a minimum AASHTO width. And what we're proposing is a 37-foot 4. So it's kind of in the middle from where we're at now and the minimum that AASHTO proposes.
You have anything, Assistant City Manager Von Eye?
The other slide, Justin, probably to hit on would be the other communities' street widths you've done some research on. I think that's pretty helpful, too.
Yeah. We looked at other engineering design standards. Harrisburg has the minimum 35-foot 4. Sioux Falls actually has a 33-foot back curb to back curb. Theirs has a note in it that it's based off of traffic volume, so there's traffic studies that are done. T has a 36-foot back curb, and Huron has a 37-foot, which is very similar to what we're proposing. So, I guess if there's the only other thing is if you wanted to take a look at any specific streets, we can pull up Google Earth and look at those. But I think these photos kind of show what the intent of the design standards are.
And I guess the only other thing I would add, Mayor, in closing of our talking points would be that 5% cost reduction. Again, that's on a per block basis, and it's roughly $6,000 per block. So if a developer's working with 10 blocks that they're constructing, that's obviously $60,000 savings. And if they're working with 20,000, that doubles that 60 to 120. And so over the entirety of a subdivision through all of its phases, it starts to become some real numbers in a pretty quick hurry as far as developer savings. And again, we wouldn't, as licensed engineers and professionals help manage development for community, we wouldn't do this just to save money for the developers. That's not obviously the sole intent. That's a good outcome of it, but we also want to make sure it's in compliance with other federal regulations. We check it off with other local municipalities in our region. And I thought Justin did a great job compiling all that information. I appreciated it greatly.
Thank you very much, engineer. Yeah, and I know that they have another issue, but I don't want to leave off the width of the road before we are done talking about that. So, done with the roads? Okay. Mr. Riefenberger, I'd like to welcome you back up to discuss your concerns that you had.
My main point in being here today is just to discuss the consideration of what might be going on with the mailbox.
And this is still in design standards?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
And I don't know to what degree things are or where they're headed, but my expectation would be if the city is entertaining this suggestion of the postal department to mandate cluster mailboxes, which then the developer would have to install. A few issues with that is obviously cost is part of it, and people don't like them, I can tell you that already, but the bigger issue is who's taking care of them things in the future? The postal department isn't, and don't look at me, I'm at my age, I ain't gonna be around when they're, so then does the city end up taking on that obligation? Or else it sounds like the alternative is we now have to make a HOA just for mailboxes. Excuse my French, but that sounds asinine.
Director Von Eye, would you walk us back through the issue that is being raised here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this to our attention tonight. It is part of the engineering design standards to incorporate new cluster mailbox standards. And the reason that got put in this revision is that several months ago, the Postmaster General here in Watertown contacted Community Development Manager Hanton and explained the change in the post office's delivery methods in our community. And they are shifting from having the ability to deliver mail on a per house basis and going toward these neighborhood cluster mailboxes. They are new to Watertown. I'm not sure if we have any other than maybe apartment complexes that exist today. However, they're not foreign to other communities of our size. I know the previous community I worked in had cluster mailboxes in the neighborhoods. They were foreign to me when I moved there. It took a while to get used to. I didn't like walking down the street to go get my mail. I wanted it right at the end of my sidewalk, right in front of my house. So there is an adaptation there for the community that for folks that move into these neighborhoods that end up having these cluster mailboxes. I guess in short, though, I would really summarize it as this is something being handed down to us as a requirement of the U.S. Postal Service. I don't really think we have much latitude to push back on or deny their request because they simply won't deliver mail in these new subdivisions if we don't comply with these cluster mailbox requirements. And that's obviously not an outcome anybody wants to see. So we've went ahead and included those. I know that the question of maintenance has come up. I would have to defer to Community Development Manager Hanton. She's been a little bit more in tune with some of the research and direct correspondence with the post office about the regulations. That she could probably shed a little bit more light on some of those details.
Well, let's get Manager Hanton up here then.
Turned it off. Okay, thank you, Heath and Mayor and Council. So the post office would take on ownership and responsibility of the continued maintenance of these cluster mailboxes. And again, it is something that was, sprung onto us as managing, so that's why we wanted to include it within the engineering design standards so that it was all the information that was needed is out there for the public. So that people know, developers know on the front end what's required. It's something that we'll look at during our subdivision process phases when, making sure they're putting a location for these cluster mailboxes. That's going to work for all parties.
Councilman Tupper?
So Director Von Eye, you mentioned that it was brought to our attention by the local postmaster.
Yeah, that's correct.
Is that here's my question, I guess. Is that a national thing that they're doing, or is this just direction of the local postmaster?
Go ahead, yeah.
So it's kind of been their federal mandate of where they're all going with it.
Okay, so, because I was just gonna say, I don't think the local postmaster would have that authority to mandate us to do that, but if it's a nationwide mandate, then I can understand that, so.
If I could, if Tony could come up here, he visited with them on this subject along with Senator Rounds and some other things already.
Yeah, when they told us that we had to have it possibly in our Prairie Haven edition, they sent us a letter after the development was all done, and I still in a gray area of if they're mandating us to put them out there yet right now or not. But when I first talked to the first person I talked to was not the temporary postmaster, it was the gentleman underneath of her, and he made my other concern is expectations, because then he asked if one of our lots that's out there when you first turn into the development, if that was going to have a house on it. I said, of course. And he said, well, we would like to have you turn that into parking and have the cluster mailboxes. So then not only am I concerned about the expense and at the time our responsibility for the cluster mailboxes, but then now there's parking out there. We're not going to be around to maintain the parking. Who's going to then expect to have the parking, snow removal and all that stuff if that's their expectation? When I talked to the actual postmaster herself, she didn't have a lot of answers for me when I asked those questions, and so I still don't have any answers from them. So.
Councilman Peters.
I'm going to follow up to that. So are they requiring parking to be next to these clusters? I know you said you didn't have all the answers. Maybe that's rhetorical, but
It was my first conversation, and it was with the postmaster, the person underneath the postmaster, but they had said that their thoughts were to have parking by the mailboxes, and that totally took me by surprise, because I thought just having the office boxes was going to be enough. Now they were talking about maybe wanting to, when you have going through the layout of are they going to expect land to have parking for the mailboxes as well? That I don't know.
follow up. So there's where we live behind us, there's some townhomes that have a cluster. Maybe that's common for townhomes. I don't know if there's any parking there, but outside of the parking, what are the impediments to you folks? What are some of the things that we should be aware of why these are bad?
Well, what my main concern was if everybody's expected to put the cluster mailboxes in, that's fine, but we don't have an HOA or anything like that. They were telling us that we were going to be responsible for maintaining the mailboxes for in perpetuity. And I don't know of any business that's going to take on that responsibility, because we weren't going to have an HOA. They just assume everybody's going to have an HOA. But it wouldn't, I think what she had said is either the post office or something hopefully is going to take over them, then that's totally fine by us. But we were been told by quite a few people, or my conversations anyway, that we were supposed to be responsible for them, and that was a big red flag for me, so.
Director Van Eye, in other areas that you've worked in, how are they managed and maintained? You mentioned that in some communities you've had these already. Are these for non-HOA developments?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple thoughts. One to the parking, that to me would be unheard of. I don't think the U.S. Postal Service can require us to take a lot and dedicate parking. So there might just be a little bit of misinformation floating around as people are learning about the application of these in communities. And we do not have any parking requirement in the engineering design standard that we've put forward. It just calls out the need for the cluster boxes to be installed. And then, what was the other point I was going to speak to? The maintenance, yes. So as Manager Hanton has clarified, the maintenance would be by the post office, and that is normal and customary based on my past experience in other communities. The post office took care of those things. If the locks go bad, if a car hits them, post office is out there repairing them. Not a homeowners association, not the neighboring property owner. It's up to the post office to maintain them.
Follow up?
Would it be appropriate for us to maybe ask the postmaster to come and enlighten us on these changes?
I would think it would be okay if we had, Manager Hanton, if you contact the postmaster directly, and get official word back, I think that might be okay.
And I have, and I could just refer back to my previous emails, just not knowing that this topic was going to come up. I wasn't prepared.
Okay.
Part of the reason being is just to have this discussion and make awareness of some of the issues that are out there, so we don't back ourselves into a corner on something here, and then you regret how things have gone. One would be the city all of a sudden becomes responsible for maintenance. So we did get a letter or a copy from them of their national regs or whatever, and it pretty much says that the mailboxes, I don't read anything there that says they're taking care of them. So I would want somebody to be sure that, from my standpoint, I have other issues, but whether I have any control of those or not, I don't. I just want to take care of things that we might have control of. One is, obviously, these are not cheap. And now that, what you just saved me on the road, you're making me spend on mailboxes, okay? Just so you realize these things are not cheap. Now we also have to add another set of regulations as we go through this development. We get the plan done. Now we have to send it to somebody over at the post office on whatever their time frame is and tell us where they would like these mailboxes to be. And then just put yourself in that spot. You probably don't want to be on the lot that has the cluster mailbox on it, so that makes that lot or that location less valuable. And I haven't heard anybody that's told me they're comfortable with having to walk down the block someplace. I understand their studies, and some of these studies maybe whether they're national or whether they're all southern, but we got winter, and now you got to get out of your car and get a key out to get into the box. And they also want these boxes to have big parcel containers too, because they don't want to deliver to the house. So how much pushback we do or don't make, I think there should at least be some conversations there before we just make it too easy for it to get turned into something more than we would expect. Because he did actually get the comment, and I think he even got some pictures of that where they have areas where they create a mail receiving area and there's roads and a road going in and parking in the clusters. They didn't tell us, nobody's told us that. We just first heard of this summer after a number of people have moved in. And since then, so far, the post office has told people out there all the mailboxes have to be on one side of the street. I understand the efficiencies of that for the person delivering to go down one side of the street. Quite honestly, I think the efficiencies of that are way better than the mail person having to get out, go to these boxes and carry their stuff and put them inside. But we're dealing with a bureaucracy that doesn't want to listen to people anyway. But I just caution that we proceed with this and make sure what we're getting into before we get into it. That's my main reason of being here today, okay?
Councilman Peters, still you?
I was just going to say what you said there at the end, and that is, we're not driving that, as I understand, on the federal. It's more the federal push than it is. And we don't really have. If they say they want it, do we have any leverage to say we don't? And the example I would give is, growing up in the country, we wanted our mailbox moved a mile down our road for years, and we talked to the township, the county. They said, not our deal, it's a postmaster's deal, and we never did get it moved. So I don't know if they say they want it, what leverage do we have?
Yeah, I do think we're rather limited. I mean, that doesn't mean we cannot ask questions and get clarity, like's being spoke of here tonight. I think a lot of that's been done with Manager Hanton's work. But it does boil down to, if they're telling us this is the only way we're going to deliver and pick up mail, then that's the only way they're going to deliver and pick up mail.
But very good to know about, because to be honest with you, I did not see that, the engineering standards. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and quite honestly, we weren't aware of this concept until we were in the middle of this first phase. And, Valley View, everybody's going to have to address this in some fashion or other, so.
Councilman Tupper?
Well, you somewhat answered my question, but in one of your earlier comments, but I'm pretty familiar with your development out there. I drive through there quite often. Is there any thought about where you would put it, or do they have any direction of where you would put it?
We're being told we don't get to say. They're going to tell us.
So they could put it in front of a pre-existing house that's already there?
No, I think that the idea is going to be, at least my presumption of that is, as a new development, that's when the standards are going to be set. This next phase that we would come forward with, we can maybe make a suggestion where we'd like to have them, and then they have apparently the final say, no, we don't like that. I can understand that to some degree as far as them mapping out the route of how a male person might go. I don't think that's my purview to know what's the best that way. I would suggest that having the mailbox on one side of the street is just as efficient as all this other, but, you know.
Well, that could change your, I mean, here you go in and you do your development and then they come back afterwards and say, here's where it's gotta go. That could change your planning on that section of the development.
We don't know that yet. We haven't got to that stage of finding out what, again, this is why I'm here today, is just to let you know we have some concerns and, would like you to be aware of that so that we just don't all get backed into a corner and we're just like, okay, we don't have any choice about it. I think we have a little bit of latitude on this on the front side because the post office is asking, basically they know that the city can regulate it. They can't enforce it only to just like they've done, and now what's gone forward is they'd like to see that, but they couldn't force it, so now they're saying, well, let's just put mailboxes on one side of the street. And maybe they'd be fine with that if the city doesn't get involved any further. I don't know, but I'm just telling you what.
So this would be more like on your second edition then?
Yeah, the next phase that we've got, well, there's got some plottings already done, ready to bring forward, but that's gonna be a new piece of that now is where the mailboxes go.
Yeah, because I definitely wouldn't want a house all of a sudden.
And I don't know, do they want one 60 box or do they want 10, 12 box? I mean, I don't know. That's pretty vague at this stage of the game, so.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to buy a lot and then all of a sudden find out that's where they're going to have the mailbox.
Yeah, look out your front window and you get to look at the back of a cluster mailbox. That's real possible.
Every neighbor in the neighborhood stopping in your front yard. So.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, okay.
Councilman Danforth.
If they bring donuts, that's not so bad, but, you know, I see these things all over. And Bill, I've seen them where they have all the mailboxes on one side, and that makes a lot of sense to me, but, so the one, do they define, and maybe this is really a Heath question or a Justin question or Brandy question, but do they define the frequency of these things in a development? Like so many homes, so much distance, do they?
Brandy, they did it once. I don't know if that was just, must have requested it somewhere, and that's up in the Willow Creek, right? Because we took pictures, but that particular one, they put stone around. They got about $10,000 in each one, and there's two of them. There's two cluster boxes there for, I think, 17 lots, 24 boxes. That's basically adding $1,000 a lot just for a stupid mailbox.
A mailbox.
Well, you need a mailbox, just because it has to be fancy. Now, that might have been their choice to do some of that cost. I don't know.
And Willow Creek Village was they had a reduced street width, and that must have been their decision. It was not anything that the city required them to do. It must have been through the post office and it's Willow Creek Village Court or Willow Creek Court. So that could have been a reason too at the time. But so this has been over a year that once we had first learned about this from the USPS. And so that's just, and it's not our jurisdiction. So ultimately, even if we didn't put it in our engineering design standards, the post office would still require it. So then we will, like I said, we'll look at it during the subdivision phases so that they can plan where they're gonna put the cluster mailboxes. And then we will send that to the USPS, the postmaster for their review, make sure they're good with it, but then everyone can plan ahead for it, of where they're gonna place it.
Councilman, to your question on the guideposts or the markers that the post office puts on these, yes, there is a targeted amount of houses they expect each one of these units to be served from. And so once we get a little bit better clarity on that could help the developers, engineers steer where to place these in their preliminary plans. And that's the review phase that Brandy's referring to.
I'm sure we look back at, after a while, we will have learned some things, but I want to be kind of upfront with this because obviously if you know that there needs to be, if the standard is going to be, there's going to be one box for 20 houses or whatever, then part of that layout becomes somewhat obvious in the sense what's maybe the best place, but then we can plop that and say that's where we want to have it, but my understanding is they don't necessarily have to agree with that, and that might get moved to someplace else, so, I mean, it's one of those things, you don't know what you're getting into until you get into it, so.
Generally speaking, on the, again, speaking from experience in another community, during the preliminary plan review phase, while staff are reviewing the plans, the post office in tandem is also reviewing the placement of these cluster boxes. I don't want to say 10 times out of 10, they always check it off and say, yep, perfect, looks good. But for the most part, especially once you get the hang of it and developers continue to use these, they kind of know where to place them and what the post office is expecting. And it's usually not a big surprise, and they usually don't shake it up too much because you've figured out the system and the amount of homes you're focusing to each one and how to appropriately separate them out throughout the neighborhood. So it just takes time to settle into that cycle with the post office. But once you get there, it's usually not very disruptive. It becomes kind of a check off and on they go.
So here's another question I have, and it really relates to what I've seen historically, you know. When we have winters that are, let's say, average to above, I have to go out, at least at my home, on a single mailbox, and I have got to make darn sure that that snow is cleared from the front of that mailbox, or they will not deliver my mail. I'm assuming that these things are to be accessed via the roadside. I'm guessing all the ones I've ever seen are.
From what I've seen, they're accessed by the mailman and by the.
From the roadside.
From the roadside, which means, yeah.
So
now,
my question is,
is that homeowner, if it's in front of you, are you stuck taking care of it for everybody?
Yeah, my question is so you know, I got a snow plow that comes by there pushing snow up against all of this, and people want to access their mail. Whose responsibility is it to make sure that's all cleared out of there? Is that, I'm assuming the post office will come with a.
That's an assumption.
Yeah. I mean, because that's a big issue. I mean, we have had our mail not delivered because of the depth of snow away from the mailbox or the amount of snow, and
so these are the
you've
things
got
that, this is
10,
exactly what I
15 of
wanted.
these
This is the kind of conversations that I think need to be had to just, you know, what's going to happen so that we don't get bit in the far end of things, and then later on, and then all of a sudden, because there's such an uproar over things, they go away, but now we've got a small area of town that's got cluster boxes and the rest never did because they didn't fly. Now, again, you know, who's mandating these things probably live in a different climate than we got. I can see different times we have sleet and rain and you can't even get your key in the mail slot because it's all iced over. So, and I'm more than comfortable driving my car up and pull my mail out of the mailbox. Most of the time I walk to the box, but when it's really crappy out, I'm not walking to the box. I'm going to pull my car up and roll the window down. So that's not an option. So anyway, I didn't mean this to be an all-night discussion. I just want to be aware of some issues that I have concerns about, and that we at least are aware of those and just don't find out after the fact.
Brandy, did you get feedback from the post office on the snow maintenance? That is one I'm uncertain of too, and something we could follow up on unless you already have that information.
Like, as far as making sure that they are cleaned up to get delivery?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think it would just be, because they'll be within the boulevard, so once the street is cleaned, then they would be able to get to the box.
Unless the plow has pushed a windrow of snow up in front of them. So that I can't remember from my previous community. I almost think it was the city's obligation to make sure when we're plowing to cut off that windrow or come back and clear that out. I don't remember with certainty though, and that's something we should get some feedback from the post office on. Who's for that?
Yeah, and just in reviewing previous emails, I am going to just get those two confirmations. I thought for certain that I had that already, that it is the post office responsibility, but I think that'll be something good to just gain clarity on, and then I can ask that question too. But yeah, ultimately, it comes down to if they're in our standards or not. It's just nice that we can have something compiled for people to expect, but otherwise, the USPS does have the right to administer what type of mail delivery they will allow.
Well, currently, that's what they wanted, and when they pushed and we didn't say we were gonna do it, they just decided, okay, mailboxes, because they could mandate that to the homeowner, say you can have your mailbox, but you gotta put them all on one side of the street. I'm not sure if there's some pushback on this, that they don't just default to that, but, obviously, if they can get the city to mandate it, then that they don't have to deal with individual people. Otherwise, they have to deal with them and look them in the eye and tell them. How are you gonna tell, Mike, how am I gonna tell you that if you want mail, you get together with your other 12 neighbors and put in a cluster box? They have to somebody has to be the authority that forces that. They don't have the authority after the fact. So they're trying to make that become a problem for the city.
All right, I'm just going to suggest we're going to end this discussion for right now and find out more information and come back at it on Monday.
Appreciate it.
Unless there's a different topic that are in the design standards that are worthy or demanding council discussion. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Director Von Ay, you okay moving on?
Absolutely, thank you.
Council, you okay? Yep. Okay. We're going to move to item 5B, council priority projects and long-term capital plan discussion. I'm going to take it over to interim city manager and finance officer Bob Zine to discuss this, and you also have the leeway to discuss any debt topics that you would like to discuss, as that directly impacts both discussions.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so we have had quite a few meetings about our long-term capital, both internal and with the council. This is a plan that does have to be approved by the end of the year. I know our last meeting, we did dive into the council priority projects. I do want to put some of the focus on the 10-year capital plan that's in front of the council, with maybe some future conversations, whether those be tonight or in upcoming meetings on the priority projects. In front of the council right now is what I would determine is a solid long-term capital plan. The first year starts out with 2025, and then we kind of move throughout. Each year is balanced in terms of using the current unrestricted fund balance or those years' revenues. The very last page of the handout does include everything that was removed to get the plan to balance for those years. This is some of that discussion and direction that staff needs from the council to determine, are some of those bigger priority than what's in the plan, and would you like to see some things moved? If not, this is considered a working document, which I do think we still have the ability to dive into specifics if the council would want to. I did also send out to the council an updated debt coverage worksheet. I made sure that the 2025 sales tax revenue projection matched what we budgeted for. And then we did receive significant funds from the Build It Now campaign for 2024. So I was able to increase that payback by an additional year. So I guess I'll kind of leave it up to the council. Mayor, if you wanted to kind of give some direction of what you're looking for. But essentially, at the next council meeting, the goal would be that we would bring forward this plan for approval, unless you are comfortable with it, and I can take that approval right now, and we could make it the approved plan.
And the plan being the
10-year.
Yes.
Yep.
So I do want to preface this discussion for the council, because I know that we just recently had a discussion on council priority projects. I will just state right off that given the income that the city is experiencing and the debt that we're looking at, and the other capital, the 10-year capital, I am going to try to guide you away from getting into the weeds of council priority projects, because if we're not comfortable with our money, there's no point in talking about big budget priority projects that we may or may not be able to even afford at this point. So first we need to understand the money, and then probably if we can get past this, get the 10-year priority project, because that has to be determined. We do still want to do the priority projects, but we have to figure this out, whereas any priority project doesn't absolutely have to be figured out tonight or on the 16th. So I'm going to direct council to focus far more on the monetary aspects and less on the big budget shiny object facilities. So with that said, open it up for questions and comments. Councilman Peters.
Ms. Bobzine, we went through this, probably about a month ago. So has anything changed in here? Because last time we discussed it, it was, and I was looking for them, but like vehicles, there were some departments that were going to delay buying vehicles for a number of years, but then they showed back up later in the plan.
Yep.
Is that still the case? Or without, going line by
Yep.
line, what has all changed?
Yes, so the only change, there's been 2 changes that were made since the last time the council has seen that. A ambulance did get removed from 2027 with the intent to put it back in, but it didn't make it back in. That was placed back into 2026. So you can see the fund balance dips about 30,000 in the red during that year. And then we did have excess revenue in 2028 being projected. We did increase the street improvement project budget by about 1.5 million and brought that up from, I think we were sitting around 2.9. So we brought that up to around 4.
Okay, perfect. So if I'm looking at public safety in 2026, that ambulance equipment, that 451,000, is that what you're referring to?
Yes,
Okay.
yep, that was placed back in.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Okay, council, any other questions? Councilman Danforth?
I'm confused as heck. These items on this last page were requested and removed,
Correct.
okay? $9 million,
Yep,
okay? I know where we're at, kinda, in regards to our revenues and projections and stuff. I'm assuming that this stuff's important and at some point needs to get put back into the budget. This, which was our kind of I'm not gonna call it a wish list, but it really was, some of it is needs and some of it's a wish, so to speak. I don't see how we're gonna get to this when we're $9 million short from getting the things that we need just to run the business that we have already today. So the discussion of not talking about this doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, we're not talking about, okay, let's plug this in here. We're talking about understanding each one of these. And then if and when the dollars come, where do we see the priorities that we should look at? If and when those dollars come. But this is gonna happen every year.
every year, yep.
Every year. You'll never get to anything on here unless I'm just not understanding this. That's why we wouldn't have discussion about that.
Well, I think it's how you want to have the discussion. The statement you made is correct. The last page shows everything that was removed. Now, those there again are identified by staff as things that they think are required or they think needs to be taken into account. There's Dusty's back there. There's various zoo improvement projects. That's where some of this conversation is as the council's looking at what was removed. Do any of those that were removed you think are not necessary? Do you want to completely remove them? Because we've removed them and haven't put them back in, and maybe you look at them and say they don't ever need to go back in. Then that 9 million becomes 8 million, 7 million, based off of whatever it is. Those are some things that we just need direction. If the plan is, no, we want to get them put in, then if you look at the second page of the handout, you do have dollars left. You are in the black once you look at like 2028 and going forward. So is the priority to fit all these that were removed in? Then we know we have a completely balanced 10-year plan. Then the conversation goes into the council priority projects of, okay, now, do you want to start setting aside dollars for these projects? Do we talk about debt? Do we talk about grants to see if we can seek a grant to fund a project? But really, in terms of the long-term capital plan, I think we as staff are looking for the council's direction of the items that are in here,
On here.
yeah, are some of those items you don't,
But how do I know?
I think
I'm
that's to have the
again, I'm confused. We
conversation.
got a police vehicle. How do I know how do we have that discussion? How do I know what the police replacement carpet, is the carpet all tore up? I don't know those things. To me, these are operational budget items. These aren't what I thought when we were as a council gonna talk about our capital projects plan, this is this is operational, most of this stuff. Some of it's not, but most of it is, okay? I don't have are we expected to talk through all of this tonight, each one of these? Before we have any discussion about? Go ahead, I don't.
Councilman Beeler?
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I look at this and I see the department heads have given this some thought. They know where we're at financially, and they've said, well, let's move this off of the budget. To me, it's gonna be up to them, it's subjected to them next year, the year beyond, which ones go kaput and which ones go back in at what time. To me, that's what's gonna, I agree with Mike on some of these, you don't know. If we need to know, we don't know what the details are. But that could come up in future budgets, I think. So to me, this is definitely subjective to the departments that establish their budget with the parameters of the revenues that we have to work with.
So can I comment just on that quick?
Yes.
So for the most part, I do agree with that. When we look at the equipment as far as you've got front end loaders and motor graders, yes, that is up to us as staff. But when you do look at a few of these items, like if you look at culture and rec, you've got a snow leopard exhibit, $550,000. You've got a red panda exhibit. Now, those are, to me, conversations to have with the council, right? Like, as we talk through the zoo. So I think there's a mix of, how can I say it? I think there's a mix of stuff where this,
So they should be added to this for discussion.
okay, and that's
Right.
where we're having the discussion, right? Is that how the council wants to move
I'm sorry.
forward,
Because I agree. I mean, we got some things that I think, because I think we do have, I thought it was on here somewhere. Don't we have something on this list of 24 items that said something about the zoo? Maybe not. No, but if there isn't zoo on here, we should have zoo.
Right.
And as a general discussion item related to those types of things. Because if the plan is that we gotta have these things, again, I'm gonna go back to Dusty and that if these things are required in order to achieve the AZA certification, that's a whole different criteria in my mind of prioritization than if it's just an add-on
Yep.
and not needed.
Yep.
Okay, so those items that would normally not be an operational, capital, or budgetary item, whatever those items are on here, then should get added to this list in some form, whether the zoo ones get grouped in at zoo,
The zoo, yep.
or however you want to do it. To me, that's how it should go, because
Okay.
I don't know if we're going to, well, I guess I'm not sure how we ever get to this discussion then, if we don't do that and have I'm gonna call it a master list, a living document master list of the capital, what we defined as the capital or council projects list. They weren't operational,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
I-
I'm going to allow, I would like Director Rodick to at least address the zoo part, and then Director Von Eye to add some context to some other issues, and then going to Councilman Bueller. So.
Okay,
Rodick.
thank you. I just wanted to help put some of the things that are on, that list that were removed into proper context. Some of those zoo items, for example, as we work through here, those are still things that we would like to see, and again, this is a master plan type document in a sense. Some of these things came off the master plan, not necessarily specifically the zoo ones, but we put together this 10-year plan with all these different items. Again, at that point, we came together as a staff and said, okay, we don't have the money to do all these things. So let's prioritize what we think we absolutely need to have in the plan, and some of these items can, as things can be afforded, as grants become available, partnership with the zoo items, partnership with the Lake Area Zoo Society. If they can become very effective and do some fundraising from those things. As I understand this, those things need to be put into a budget, a plan, to be able to be included in a CIP budget, so we have the authority to go forward with those projects. Let's say the Zoo Society comes up with the money for a red panda exhibit. At that point, it gets put in the budget, just so we have the financial authority to spend that. So many of those things that are, let's say in the, I don't know what it's termed, culture and recreation, I'm not very cultured. Those were in there to, yep, long-term, those would be good things to do in the community, but they're not actually absolutely critical at this point. So it was more of a prioritization from our standpoint to what needs to happen versus those would be nice things to happen. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Director Von Eye?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Director Rodick.
To kind of take along with Director Rodick's talking points and CFO Bob Zine on, I just wanted to help emphasize, the goal here when we were working through this new long-term capital plan with the city manager was to make sure this thing was balanced. And that's effectively what the last sheet ended up being by balancing this thing. If we want this to balance year over year, it took us as all the department head team to come together and say, all right, what do we need to cut out of here? And then Chris and her team did an excellent job tracking that, because I would have lost track. So that last sheet that they provided really pays close attention to everything that we had to pluck out of here in order to see it balanced. So I wanted to make that point because having a long-range CIP that's balanced definitely makes good sense, and it means that we're not having to supplement it with the extra cash on hand that could otherwise go towards the council project list. Now, that doesn't mean that has to happen that way. We can take that extra cash on hand and say, okay, we're not going to put it towards the special projects. We need to put it towards some of these needs that were plucked out. That's certainly an option that the council has. But this was our initial blush at this thing to get it to balance. And then that list of needs that were cut out that's on the last page are really exemplary of what each department is essentially sacrificing over the next 10 years. I'd point out a couple of the public works items briefly, some of the street equipment, motor graders, payloaders, trucks, plows in years 26, 7, and 8. I think there were some of each and maybe a street sweeper mixed in there. Now at some point, we can't just not buy all those things forever, right? We're going to have to replace what we've got at some point. So in the subsequent capital planning, that's where we have to determine our priorities. One year it might be a fire truck over a street sweeper. The next year it might be a street sweeper over police cars. The next year it might be whatever the combination is the city needs to make this capital plan work. That's where we left it parked, knowing that we had a lot of work to do in the years ahead. And the last plug I'll put in for that would be potential for additional revenue sources to help make all this come together all the more clearly in the years to come. Nothing we have to do to make 25 work, nothing we have to implement tomorrow, but definitely a talking point to at least consider alternative sources of revenue to make sure these things can come together in the subsequent years.
Oh, okay.
I'll jump in and just, so I think what I'm kind of hearing is, I think departments still have a little bit more work to do. And I think what we'll try to do is identify those more equipment that wouldn't be as project driven items that were removed. And there is still dollars left. If you start to look at about 2030, you can start to see we're back in the black on most of those. So what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll fit some of these, the street equipment is some big items, kind of place those back in, and we'll bring forward on the 16th a balanced, completely balanced with all of this that we've identified as operational needs, and see how close we get then, and put that forth on the 16th.
Thank you. And I'm not closing up conversation just because I'm speaking, but I just want to say my thoughts is, I envision this, I definitely don't think we are stopping the conversation on the council priority projects. In the review from the council, it came back overwhelmingly that the street department was a desired facility and that we want to see it happen. That was clear from the votes of the city council. So city council is giving direction that we want to find a way to get that done. But at the same time, we also want to be cautious about what we are giving up in order to make that happen. And we just need to be very aware of that. And it's, you know, like a family budget. You can go to Disney World. I should come up with a better thing because the street department is a need. Let's say you can build an addition onto the house so that all of your kids have a bedroom, but what you're giving up is that trip to Disney World, or you're giving up buying a new car in the next couple of years. So it isn't that we don't ever. Okay, I shouldn't have used the car analogy with Councilman Tupper there. But I think what we're getting to, and what I think Councilman Danforth for mentioning is, this is a daunting list of things that were cut out, an extremely daunting list. And we need to understand what impact it would have to the operations with these departments as far as what we're sacrificing in order to get the priority project that we do want. In some cases, you can make the argument that, like in the public works sector, is a new street facility more important to the street facility and the maintenance of roads and the plowing of roads than getting the motor grader or the sweeper for that department? Now, that's a question that can be had. Is it more important to have the facility or the upgrade in the vehicles? Well, that's for council to decide. I guess in my mind, I'm going to go forward with the department facility because that gets us, we know that that absolutely has to be done with, and there's going to be no end to the constant need of new vehicles or upgrading. So if we can afford the facility, let's move forward with it. That was clearly number one on the council's list, and not to say that anything else isn't a priority, but the other items on the list for council priority projects were further down. So I guess that's the way that I'm looking at it. It's not that I guess I would have to look at it and say, you know, what really jumps out, like we need to figure that out. Public safety being the two, ambulance, police vehicles, because public safety is going to be number one. But at this time, if we can squeeze out a couple more years while we also prioritize a community priority, which is streets, then let's do that. So, and I think that we're close. I think we're actually really close to being able to move forward on both those fronts. So, Councilman Bueller.
I just want to compliment you on the job you did with this. This is very clear. You did a really nice job putting this together for us. Thank you.
Councilman Tupper.
And I'm going to echo that too, because that's one thing. I mean, we've never looked at a 10-year, but we got to remember we're probably coming off, or in 2024, we're not even out of that yet. Probably one of the worst years we've seen in sales tax revenues. So I admire for the being very cautious. We don't know what next year is going to bring. Hopefully next year will be way better, and we can start taking those things on that back page and plugging them back in. And that's one thing that I've worked with a couple different CFOs, and they've always been very, very, very cautious with taxpayer dollars and budgeting very slightly. And it's when she sends out the sales tax reports when we get them. Sometimes they've been a little surprising. Last one was pretty good, but let's hope they start going on that trend again. And then this time next year, we'll be talking a different story. But my hat's off to everybody, for the department heads to realize that, and Kristen and her department to not set us up for failure, put it that way. So that's why they keep getting their awards every year. So thank you.
Councilman Danforth.
All right. I listed the street facility as my first priority because we got $3 million into it. But, and there's the but, certainly questions there. But, so I have to look at what we already have as either a requirement for us or something that potentially is a requirement, which is a decision point for us. And the two examples I'm going to use is this, is the event center improvements. As the owner of that building, we have an obligation to the tenant to take care of things. So I'm just going to take it at face value. That's $2 million, okay? I look at flood control. We have a study that's being in the process now. And we've committed to, what, $900,000, whatever the number is, $700,000 of city funds to get the study done, some number like that. What if we approve it? What's our, based on what was presented to us, what's our share of the plan, dollar-wise, that we would have to accommodate? Isn't it like $5 or $7 or $9 million or something like that?
Yeah, if I remember right off the top of my head, local match was 8, and if the state were to split that with us, ours becomes 4.
4, 5,
Real
somewhere in
rough
that neighborhood.
numbers.
Let's just say that the state's really good to us. So now I got $2 million in an obligation I have as the landowner of the event center, and I got 4, 5, maybe $8 million in flood control, because we just spent $750,000 or $700,000 on a study. But yet, I look at the street facility as my highest priority. Because now all of a sudden that becomes my third priority, because we have to take care of what we've already committed to. A, owners of a event center and taking care of that. And B, the flood control that we're approving. So how does that happen? How do we prioritize the street department and say, Heath and crew, go for it? And then all of a sudden, where do we get the $2 million, and where do we get the $4 or $5 or $8 million to do the other ones that we've already? How does that happen? Help me with that. So, because to me, that's where the prioritization comes from, is understanding what we are obligated to
Correct.
first.
Yep.
So help me out.
So, and I think that's why, I think that was kind of the conversation leading into, the first step is to get this approved. Then staff knows. Then our next meeting is to establish those. The survey went out, the results are tabulated. We know where the priorities sit. Then the open discussion starts to take place. Okay, because I know the event center, I think, was on one of those picks. I think flood control was on it, and it probably, the way it's sounding, didn't make it to the top. Well, that's then for the council to have those open conversations of, okay, it didn't make it to the top, but should it? Where then you can ask questions of the staff and say, what are those? What information do you as a council need from us as staff to provide, so that maybe your council priorities do change based off of information that was provided? From what I remember from that meeting, right, everybody just kind of was putting out what they thought were priorities, but it wasn't based maybe off of so much information that was readily available at that time. So I think in the next meetings, it's now to look at all those priorities, and then essentially, what information do you as a council need from us as staff to maybe they do change, maybe the order does change.
Follow up.
One that we talked about earlier today, and is that in our course of business is we approved the requesting of a grant by the development company, right? And if they get that grant, then they're obligated to $1 million of cost. How much of that are we going to be asked for? Because if we go and ask that, and they go to the work to get the grant, and there's $1 million, are we going to be asked for any amount? Because now that becomes an obligation that needs to be considered before we start doing, we have a street department today. It may not be great, but we have one. These other things are items that if we've already made step towards that, we really don't have a choice. We really don't. We can say we're not gonna do flood control, well, that one comes off the map. We don't do that. Okay, but what if they get the grant? Do they have the money to do that without coming to us? That's just a rhetorical question.
It is, yep.
And what do we do about the event center? You know, so I'm sitting here going, we have things that we got to take care of business as we've already obligated to in some manner first before we consider any of these other things. And that's where I'm coming. I thought that's what we were going to do tonight. I'm a little perplexed, but that's fine. We need to get to that discussion at some point.
Yep.
But I was just surprised because that's what I thought the intention was.
Director Vaughn, I will go with you, but I do want to comment on something Councilman Danforth just said. It's like, I understand where you're coming from. It's like I guess my viewpoint on the CPP was just different, and that doesn't mean that I was right. It just means that I was looking at it from a different perspective, but I totally get it now. Not saying that my priorities might change, but I totally get that conversation because that is important for council to know. Like, if we are, as the landlord to the event center, and we're saying, it's like, okay, tenant, sorry, but you're gonna live without this for 2 years. You're gonna book a lot less weddings. You're probably not gonna be happy, and then that might be in the contract negotiations. But that is a conversation that has to be had, and that it can be a difficult one. So totally understand now, and understand a lot better. I think council appreciates probably hearing that perspective. Director Von Ay, you wanted to add something?
I would steer back to the current plan that's in front of you, in the unreserved fund balance at the bottom of that, I think on the first page, that 4.7 million. I think it was made clear in the last discussion that we were proposing to take that 4.7 and put it into the special projects fund in order to accomplish the street facility. So to Councilman Danforth's point, if we were to show that on the spreadsheet, that 4.7 then becomes 0, and you can see what impact that makes on the bottom line there forward for every subsequent year. So I think the important part of the equation here, as far as, while this plan is autonomous from the special projects fund, they're intertwined enough to know where's the money for the special projects coming from. Likely it's from that unreserved fund balance or any excess sales tax revenue that we get year over year that we did not budget for. And those amounts year over year, if we just rely on that excess sales tax revenue, for example, that could be any given number, any given year. It's not a great sound thing to fall back on to say, all right, that's how we're gonna get our special projects done. We're gonna wait and see how much extra sales tax revenue we have every year. But what I'm getting at is marrying these two enough to say, if we take this unreserved fund balance, we put it towards council special projects, what does that do to the long-term needs for equipment and everything else on that last page that's listed? And then also, what does it look like to plug in a street maintenance fee? And what does that additional revenue generate for street repairs that then frees up those dollars for fire trucks and motor graders? It's all part of the discussion to somehow map out and talk through, because I think there are all kinds of variables that come into play and all kinds of things that the council could decide, yes, do that, no, don't do that. Whether it comes to actual purchasing of things, whether it comes to the special projects, whether it comes to the alternative sources of revenue, they've all got to kind of mesh well together for the needs of this community, is what I'm trying to make a point of.
Officer?
Yeah, so as much as maybe we didn't hit on the council priority projects, I do feel that this conversation helped kind of to direct staff even a little bit more. Now I know that the list of those removed items, if it's really, in my opinion, considered more of a project base, I'm going to kind of dump that into the council priority project listing as well. If it's more of an operational need as far as equipment, whether it's an ambulance, a motor grader, I'm going to work a little bit closely with staff here to have them really look at the detail of that specific equipment ask and maybe identify when the true need of it does happen. What year does that need to take place? Because when you do look at the plan, we do have excess dollars in some of these years. So I do think we can get it to be where most of the operational needs can be met. And then that can drive some of those conversations even to that point, though, where we do need the direction of the council. The event center is a great conversation. $2 million worth of improvements. Okay, what does that look like on some of those equipment needs as well? So I feel like this meeting did bring us as departments a little bit of a ability to fit some of these requests back in, and then hopefully on the 16th bring forward a plan that has them all placed back in and a really great list for the council projects. Okay?
So, yep. So at the December 16th meeting, we'll be really discussing the last sheet, but with an understanding that the items that will be brought in or, open for consideration are like considered vital and, or I don't even want to say vital because they might be cut. Let's say not just customary upgrades to equipment or vehicles that are on a timetable, because the timetable might not be accurate. I'm not exactly sure, but how to mention it, because the budget, these items that were cut to get us to a position where we can fund the facility, which we don't want to give up on, but we also want to understand what we're giving up a little bit better.
And I don't know if they were necessarily cut for any specific project. It was just more of us trying to have, as department heads, it was kind of like, I feel like we got to the spot where we were, and now we needed kind of direction from the council. And I think tonight is what we received, is it's try to create a 10-year long-term capital that keeps us in all of our operational needs, pull out anything that isn't part of our day-to-day operations, and then the council needs to kind of give some direction on those things. So that's what the council will see on the 6th.
Okay, thank you. Director Von Eye?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. One last tidbit I would throw out is, I think I'd speak for the department heads, we're okay seeing this adopted as presented. I wanted to make that point. 25, we're set. And there's no streets that aren't going to get plowed in 25. There's no patrolling that's not going to get done in 25. But we do know, and the reason I say we could adopt this as is, if that's what the council desires next week, that gives us time to figure out the special projects fund. It gives us time to figure out alternative sources of revenue. It gives us time to look at these impacts of what's been otherwise pushed on pause on that last page and put on the do not buy now list because money's simply not there. So I just wanted to make that point. We don't have such a big a bite of the apple to take on next Monday to say we need to figure out this whole list that was cut. I think we can do that over time is what I was trying to imply.
Okay, thank you, Director. And I want to apologize. I misspoke. I would not have said the street facility because that's not a decision by the council yet, because it actually might change based upon some conversation that we might have regarding, as Councilman Danforth said, regarding obligations. So the obligations might rise to the front. But what this would do, adopting it as is, would free up the money to address that. And then if we decide not to address one of the council priority projects or an obligation, because that would still be, like the event center was still listed on the CPP list. So let's say we determine to maybe fund one that costs less, then we could still start adding back some of these CIP things that we cut. So that's going to be the balance. And yeah, it doesn't absolutely have to be decided on Monday, but we can decide to move forward the best that we can and work with what we have. Councilman Tupper?
Just another thing, if we were to return back to that close to double-digit sales tax increases, a lot of those things could slowly start getting plugged back in also, so.
I think I heard Councilman Jurens. Yeah, Councilman Jurens.
I would love to sit here and continue to have a civics class right here with a college kid. my daughter and I are driving down the road, so it's pretty interesting to just sit back and listen because she's going, "What does this mean?" And we're just having good conversation, just like you guys are. And I want to commend Kristen, Heath, the department heads, Dusty, and the council for having this conversation in the public. You know, we talk about anybody can be in front of the public and make easy decisions, but these are the tough decisions, and we've outlined a few of those. What it also gives me a chance, I've been not traveling, but stopping at coffee tables and lunch tables around Watertown, and every place I go, the discussion is about the street department. It comes up every time, and now we've all seen, and I'm one of them that has put that on the top of my priority list. It doesn't mean, like you said earlier, that's going to happen or not, but to put some perspective into why it's top on my priority list, is that we can look at phasing projects like this in. We don't have to go all in, so to speak, on a project of this size. You know, so I would really like, and I've talked about this before in the public and in council meetings, but also now around town, is I would really, really like to see some ideas floating around about how to get a street department facility started. Maybe we can see a phase that's 7 or 9 million instead of 15 to 17 million. You know, I'm not an expert in building, but I see projects like this that can get phased in. Maybe we can get, maybe we say as a council that our budget is 7 to 9 million on top of the 3 that's already been spent. And what can we get for that for now, for the next 5 years? And then have just have a discussion about that being a really important part to the future of our city and running our city is a street department facility. So those were just some things that I wanted to throw out there as commending having this public conversation, but to also get this conversation going around our city, what their priorities are. What's the priorities of Lake Area Technical College? You know, in future employment in Watertown, you know, so there's a lot more to this. Where do they see, like, I was having a discussion with someone about where do they see robotics going? Are these employers that we can bring to Watertown? And do we build these, do we build 31st Street, and do we build this to create economic development? Do we prioritize the upgrade in Calvin Park? You know, those are some good discussions, and there's people in our community that they're forward thinking, they have ideas that have done some real good thinking on this. So appreciate the time, appreciate the efforts going forward, but these are projects that maybe more can be done if we bring the numbers back and we can get the improvement done out at the event center, like Councilman Danforth and many of us know. We may need to do that no matter what. So how do we fit that in? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Jurgens, and I want to say I would also concur. I appreciate having this robust conversation at a public meeting. So, Councilman Danforth?
Yeah, Kristen, I got a question in regards to that last page. On the far right, it says year, and it breaks down there. Is that the year that it would normally have been planned for?
Correct.
Okay, so all of those items then in no way are reflected anywhere in any of this?
Correct. Anything that was moved, if it was moved in years, was placed into that year. These were items that were removed and not placed anywhere.
All together?
Altogether.
Okay, so as we look at this, we really do have, it's not that we just moved the piece of the puzzle out a little bit.
No.
We're saying it's off of here.
Yep.
And so, for example, a motor grader, well, that's $1 million, right? I don't know what those needs are. So, and obviously we have to replace them, no matter when. So, I just wanted to make sure I understood that when we say they're removed, they physically are nowhere noted in
Not in
here.
here.
It's not
Nope.
that they got moved out, they are gone.
They're gone.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mayor, can I make one point of clarity quick? Only because Councilman Danforth picked that one item out of that whole list. It's a point of clarity. That's 2 motor graders, just for point of clarity. You happen to pick that one that needed some correction.
Free if we have to plow in front of the
Mailboxes?
mailbox.
All right, any further questions or comments? All right, thank you. Are there any future council items read ahead or to read ahead? No? Any public comment? If anyone would like to address the council on something that is not on the agenda, now is your time to do so. A closed public comment. Councilman Tupper looks like he has something to say, so I'll open up council, anything not on the agenda that you wanted to say. Councilman Tupper?
Boy, what a weekend in Watertown. I just, you know, a lot of people ask me how I take this job on, and because I love this community. You know, I was involved in an event out to Prairie Lakes Ice Arena on Saturday night. I was invited to participate in it, and it was a kind of a neat deal for the Shamrock game. It was Teddy Bear night, and everybody that wanted to got to bring a teddy bear. The original plan was the first goal that Shamrock scored, everybody'd throw their teddy bear out there. And unfortunately, the game didn't turn out like we liked, so we had to do it at the end of the game. But boy, did this, and all the teddy bears are going to get donated to the Salvation Army. My job in that role was to drive a pickup out on the ice and pick up the teddy bears. And, well, first off, earlier in the night, some fans got a little bit mad at a call, and a bunch of teddy bears went flying out in the ice. And there was 3 huge boxes that Captain Jolly had there from the Salvation Army, and that filled those 3 boxes. But at the end of the game, everybody started throwing their teddy bears out there. And I did my job. I pulled my pickup around. Well, guess what? The box of that pickup wasn't big enough. They were throwing teddy bears in there. It was heaping full, and they were falling out about as fast. I finally had to lift up the back seat and open up the back doors to get all those teddy bears in that pickup. I can't imagine how many hundreds, or I would say maybe over 1,000 teddy bears. There was 2-inch teddy bears. There was 4-foot teddy bears. There was a little bit of everything. What a great community we live in, where the people came around, and it's been a great, that just shows you the great assets that the Shamrocks have been to the community also. God, it was hard enough getting the pickup out the door, but I didn't know if I was going to get my head out the door. I felt so good about the thing. It just this community always, when something like that happens, this community always steps up to the plate, and I was honored to be part of that, and my hat's off to the Shamrocks who organized that, and all the fans that brought their teddy bears and held on to them patiently all night. But like I say, well, it took 3 of us 15 minutes to transport the teddy bears from the pickup into the Salvation Army van. That's how many teddy bears there were. It's just amazing. So I just wanted to hats off to the community for being part of that, and thank you for allowing me to be part of it.
Thank you. Council, anyone else have anything to say? I'd like to echo what Councilman Tupper was just saying about the teddy bears, but broaden that. Watertown is an incredibly giving community. I would like to just cite a couple different things. The Beacon Center last week did a radiothon on KXLG and raised their goal well ahead of time, and they kept going. So it was a really good day for the Beacon Center, and I want to thank everyone who donated for that. Like to thank KXLG for hosting that. And that was a great event because the Beacon Center is an entity that we as a city fund as well, and serves an incredibly important function in our community. But even what Finance Officer Bob Zine mentioned earlier today, that we're going to be able to free up some money in a couple of years because there's literally 1.4 million coming in donations to build it now for the ice arena. And that should never be underestimated. You're talking $10 million raised, and it's coming in. People are paying it. Don't underestimate that as a community, so pat yourself on the back, Watertown. And I'm just gonna segue into my pitch. One really good way to give back to your community is by shopping local. Because when you shop local, the money circulates in the community many times over, pays to employ your friends, your neighbors, their kids, pays for all the kids' sports teams. Everyone benefits when you shop local. So give back to your community while you're giving presents this Christmas. So thank you very much. Any further comments? Oh, he's showing me a picture of the teddy bears. Any further questions or comments? All right. We do have a reason to go into executive session to discuss contractual issues. I do not anticipate taking action when we come back, but I will just leave it at that. I don't want to categorically say we will 100% not take action, but I do not anticipate it. But with that, I do need a motion to go into executive session. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Shoddy. All those in, well, actually, I'll just say, do I have to, can't even remember. We'll just say, all those in favor of going to executive session, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Councilman Jurens, are you still on?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, did you want me to call you for exec? I'm not sure if that's even